Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Bethann Garramon Merkle about field drawing in natural science education. Field drawing has long been used as a method of documentation and observation in the natural sciences. However, more technologically advanced documentation tools, perceived dichotomies between artistic and scientific capabilities, and low artistic confidence in both students and instructors have resulted in declining interest and usage of field drawing as a skill. How can these mental barriers be challenged and overcome? Can the value of field drawing be revived? Bethann's been working hard to find out. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but before we dive in, we want to give a quick shout out to our first sponsor, Gasmet Technologies, the maker of the GT5000 Terra, the smallest portable FTIR multi-gas analyzer for greenhouse gas and environmental research. Measure carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane, nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide, ammonia, and water vapor in real time simultaneously from static or automated chambers. Visit www.gasmet.com, that's Gasmet spelled G-A-S-M-E-T, or email sales@gasmet.com for more information. We also wanted to thank our new sponsor, Meter Group. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Find world-class webinars about the science behind environmental measurements at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show today. We have Bethann Garramon Merkle with us today on the show. She is a SciComm researcher and award-winning science communicator. Bethann has bylines and illustrations in several books and over 300 publications in outlets including Nature, American Scientist, and more. Specializing in art science integration and inclusive science communication, she has trained nearly 800 scientists on how to share their science with diverse public audiences and how to raise the funding to do so. She is particularly committed to making science-allied careers more inclusive and equitable, especially as it relates to public engagement and science communication. Hi, Bethann. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Abby. Thanks for chatting with me.
Absolutely. We are so happy to have you on the show. I'm very excited about this topic. Anything art related makes me really happy. So glad to have you. So today we are talking about field drawing skills in general, and how to incorporate that into the classroom. So can you give us some background information on maybe the problem or issue that you were hoping to address in this research?
Yeah, so the short story is that drawing has been a part of science basically since we started thinking of science as a practice and a way of understanding the world. Obviously, at first, drawing was a part of science because that was the main tool that people had to visualize things. And over time, we've gained other tools like cameras and all sorts of other ways of visualizing science, and our use of drawing has declined a lot. And importantly, our use of drawing as a teaching and learning tool in science has really declined. And there's a fair amount of information out there supporting the ongoing use of drawing as part of a researcher's practice in science, and also as tools for helping students learn, assessing their learning, and helping students feel some ownership in their own learning. So we were interested in trying a couple of different types of interventions that might help make people feel more comfortable using drawing in the classroom again. And I will say that there's a kind of intermediate problem, which is that, or maybe it's the more acute problem. So if the historical problem is that we used to use drawing and now we don't very much, the kind of acute element of that problem is that fewer and fewer scientists are trained in drawing. And as a result, we expect that most scientists who are teaching and could use drawing to teach are likely not comfortable enough with drawing themselves to feel confident bringing that in as a tool in the classroom. So we were interested in addressing both that longer term arc of less drawing in science classrooms and the more immediate issue of supporting faculty to feel more confident using drawing as a tool.
Great. That's an excellent overview. Yeah, I'm really excited to dig into a lot of this, and I thought a lot of your perspectives on why people don't like to draw, or some of the pressures that make people feel uncomfortable with drawing or sketching, which you said in your research is used interchangeably here in this setting, were really interesting. So I'm excited to get to that. But for now, let's move on to kind of your hypothesis here. And you took a bit of a two-pronged approach here, addressing both the students themselves as well as the instructors. So can you tell me what you were hoping to, I guess, test with this?
Right. So the core question is, what difference does it make if we actually teach people how to draw? And then you can imagine that that would apply a little bit differently for students and for their instructors. With the students, the question is, if you're introduced to basic drawing skills, ideally by someone who's experienced in them and experienced in teaching those drawing skills, can that change how you experience drawing in a science classroom? Specifically, as you were talking about a minute ago, we see a lot of students with serious hangups around drawing and art more broadly. And it has a lot to do with really negative social conditioning over time. Our social perspective, it has become that folks are kind of magically able to draw or do other types of art activities. And so you're either good at it or you're not, a very fixed mindset sort of approach. However, the way that drawing works is that it's a basic set of skills. They've been developed over centuries, and you can learn them, you can be taught them, you can teach them, and you can get better at them. So our hypothesis was that providing drawing support to students would make a positive difference in their experience of drawing assignments in a science classroom. And then ideally that using drawing to observe and to learn and to record and to reflect back knowledge to the instructor would enhance students' awareness, their attention to detail, their performance in the class broadly. And then on the instructor side, if you don't feel at all comfortable with drawing, because again, you likely had very similar social conditioning against feeling confident in drawing, you probably don't feel like you're at all equipped to, one, introduce it in your classroom, and two, assess it. And so the question there was, if the instructors are also trained in these basic drawing practices and then also coached on how to facilitate them, how to frame assignments effectively, what kind of rubrics can be meaningful for students, how to build drawing in as a low stakes assignment before making it part of, say, a test question. If we build that kind of training and coaching in for the instructors, can they build their confidence? Can they build or enhance their sense of efficacy for using that sort of an approach? And can that make a difference in course delivery and the way that drawing might get integrated into the class itself?
Sure. Yeah, and I would love to talk more about some of these specific methods that you use to approach both of these problems. Starting with the students, I know you actually were doing a lot of the teaching and coaching yourself as both a researcher and an artist. So can you tell me more about like what kinds of exercises were you using to help teach these students some drawing skills, as well as like what are the philosophies or theories and ideas behind why these methods are the best way to teach these skills?
Sure. So usually the workshop starts, let me back up just a second. I got into this kind of work after being a student in a science program that required drawing. And for me, it was this magical synthetic experience because I really liked drawing and art practices. And I also really liked science. And I was a sophomore in college and no one had ever put them together or asked me to put them together. So it was really transformative for me. But a lot of my classmates did not have a similarly productive experience. And toward the end of this course, it was a 1-year program, 15 students. We took all our courses together. They were from all over the disciplines. At the end of the course, we went on a 10-day float trip down the Missouri River, and each of us was responsible for teaching the rest of the group some kind of lesson that connected with the environment that we were in. And I did a brief introduction to the way that Western artists depict landscapes and environmental concepts, and then did a quick introduction to how to use watercolors and do a couple of different drawing activities. And after that little workshop I did, which was the first time I'd taught any of this kind of material, and it was an assignment, or I may have never done it, several of my classmates came up and said that the things that they had been struggling with were at least partially addressed by some of the things I had shown them. And it turned out that a lot of them hadn't had any kind of drawing training since middle school or maybe even elementary school. And many of them had had very negative experiences with art making, and an adult or a peer kind of shaming them for not being technically as proficient at something as they might have wanted to be, or as someone around them was. And so they kind of just blocked off doing art stuff. And so kind of interestingly, the program facilitators heard that feedback and invited me to come in and do an introductory afternoon with their subsequent cohorts for about 5 years. And that's what really first raised this question in my mind. Can we make this experience that was extremely empowering and exciting for me something that's accessible to more people? And is it as simple as showing them some basic drawing skills? And I was an undergraduate student at that time. I didn't know anything about these types of research approaches. And so there's no documented evidence to show for the decade that I've spent in between doing this kind of work. But I've taught workshops like that for the past 10 years, basically. A lot of work with students, a lot of work with teachers. And it turns out that there are a few practices that I was trained in when I learned art in high school and college that seem to be really accessible for the people that I teach them to. And so I would say that it's an observation-based experiential process that has brought me to these particular approaches. You will also find them as really core activities in most learn how to draw books. Most of them, whether they're teaching you how to draw nature specifically or to draw observationally more generally, are going to introduce some of these core things. And they're also foundational practices that artists use to warm up, to hone and refresh skills, and also to kind of shake us out of our assumptions about what objects or landscapes might look like and get us to look at the specificity and the detail of them. So I've spent the last 10 years trying to figure out how to break down these practices so that they're really accessible to people who feel anxiety around drawing and or have just never really been introduced to it.
Yeah, I love that. What a fun sounding trip, for one thing, but also how rewarding to be able to translate and share something that you are passionate about and love to other people. That's always so much fun. So can you tell us more about the specific activities or practices that you're teaching that are so relatable for people?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the first things that I usually do is ask folks to draw a tree from their memory, just any old tree, and they get a minute or two. We try not to be super precious about it. And then we shift right away into, okay, draw a specific tree, a tree that you really cared about when you were young, or a tree that you're very familiar with now. And again, they only get a minute or two to do that. And usually I begin that way because one of the core things that that the instructors I'm working with are interested in is helping their students see drawing as a tool for seeing, not seeing the drawing as an end of its own. And so what that initial exercise does is help students to realize all the things about the specific tree that they can't summon up from their memory, that they would need to go back to that specific tree and look at closely, intimately, specifically themselves. So the framework that we usually use to help them remember that as a tool is that a blank page is blank. And if you can help students recognize that what's on the page is only a fraction of the whole point, you've started to shift the goalposts basically and help them understand that aesthetics is not the principal goal here. And it's okay if something looks rough or scribbly, or you've kind of drawn on top of it several times to figure out kind of where you think the line should go. So we start there with that experience as a concept, that you're not going to learn a whole lot through observation if you're just focused on what's on the page. And then we jump into a conversation of creativity and rethinking creativity and understanding that creativity is about innovation and using existing skills and knowledge towards new problems and new types of tasks, and try to help folks feel more comfortable in a space that they may feel like is usually really separate from science, helping them see how a lot of our advances in scientific areas wouldn't be possible if people hadn't been creative themselves. And then we move into a set of sketches or techniques for sketching. And the first one and the core one goes along with that blank page is blank idea. It's a contour sketching approach, and it was popularized by the author of the somewhat familiar book, The Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, Betty Edwards. And there are aspects of the way that she facilitates how people learn that have been debunked. For example, the difference, like some kind of separation between right brain and left brain thinking, is not super productive, and it's not physiologically accurate either. But some of her approaches for how to learn drawing skill are great. And the contour sketch is basically an approach where you are looking at your object, not your paper. So you have no control over how your drawing turns out. And that's really, really like sort of scary, but also liberating for people when they're first learning. It is really funny because when you see your drawings, they look like snarls of yarn. They're fairly outrageous looking. And it also kind of equalizes things, because if I were to sit down right alongside you and we were both to sketch a similar object, my sketches would look absolutely as ridiculous as yours would. But we both would have hopefully noticed a lot about our object because we were concentrating on looking at it instead of looking at the results on our paper. And our manuscript goes into more detail about how to actually facilitate that. But the short story there is that we're setting some constraints on students or on learners broadly so that they are compelled to care more about the object than about the drawing outcome.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Bethann's article, Drawn to Natural History, Enhancing Field Courses with Drawing and Field Journal Instruction, published in Natural Science Education, is always freely available. You can find a link to it in our show notes. If you are a certified crop advisor or certified professional soil scientist, you can take a quiz for continuing education units for this episode, which can be found in our show notes or on certifiedcropadvisor.org. Thanks again also to our sponsors, Meter Group and Gasmet Technologies. Meter specializes in robust soil moisture sensing, innovative weather monitoring, cloud data logging, advanced data visualization software, and more. Their well-published scientific instrumentation is used worldwide in universities, research and testing labs, government agencies, agriculture, and industrial applications. Find world-class webinars about the science behind environmental measurements at metergroup.com/fieldlabearth. For GasMet Technologies, conduct greenhouse gas flux measurements in the field using the GT5000 Terra. Weighing 20.7 pounds, splash-proof IP54 rated, internal pump and battery, and vibration resistant, the GT5000 Terra is a robust and portable multi-gas analyzer for fieldwork. Visit www.gasmet.com or email sales@gasmet.com for more information. Thank you for being our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. Wow, what I love about this project is that, you know, if someone were to say, "Oh, I'm writing a paper on how to help students, you know, take up field drawing," one would expect that a lot of the lessons would be about the technical aspects of drawing. Like, here's how to do shading. Here's, you know, shapes that you're going to, you know, start with shapes and then add details and such and such. But I like that a lot of your paper is like, nope, like we got to just start with like breaking mental barriers first and really reframing art as an entirely different thing than I think that most people would assume that it would be. So I adore that. And then also this probably leads fairly well into how you then have to remold some of that as well for the instructors. So can you tell me more about how you were hoping to coach them and teach them how to teach these skills?
Yes. So there's a couple of elements to it. What I've learned over the years working with teachers and what we decided that we were going to try to document and measure basically with our work in this paper is that one and done doesn't really work for teachers or for students. The idea of being told to draw but not taught to draw is as complex and intimidating for the faculty as it can be for the students. So my goal with working with these particular faculty members was to help build their confidence in being a facilitator. And over time, we've noticed that building that confidence is contingent on a couple of things. So one of the faculty members who's a co-author on this paper and I have been working on this and his process and his approach to this kind of work for several years. And then the other faculty member, I've only worked with maybe 2 semesters. So we had quite a difference in their exposure to this material, in the amount of time that they'd have to digest some of the supporting literature that I've shared with them, and in the amount of time that they've had to practice making these kinds of assignments, assessing these kinds of assignments, coaching students through it on their own once I'm no longer in the classroom with them. And so what we've noticed over time is that all of those things are really important. That if I just show up and do a workshop in the classroom, we've noticed that the faculty member doesn't build any autonomy in that space. And we've noticed that it helps them to take me seriously if I'm speaking their language, and their language is evidence-based, you know, research-driven observation and or experimental approaches to understanding phenomena in the world. And so over time, I have really shifted my way of framing a lot of this stuff to make sure that I'm pointing back into the literature on integration of art and science teaching, on creativity in science broadly, on the way that people teach and learn about drawing, whether it's in science or beyond. And I have a hunch that one of the things that's going on there is that this orientation to the literature that underpins my approach makes my approach more credible. And it also makes it more credible if they are trying to explain why they're doing it to their peers, to their department chair, to whoever it is who's responsible for checking on how they're doing as an instructor. And so it has become clear that it is important to not just empower and equip them to do this work in the classroom, but to provide them also with a foundation that helps them justify, or at least frame why they are taking this approach. So it's important for instructors to do the drawing workshop along with their students, both so that their students see them drawing, because if you tell somebody to draw but you never draw yourself, they quickly don't believe you that drawing is important because you're not modeling it's important. And then it's also important for them to participate in the workshop process and the supplemental work so that they feel like they're equipped to own it. It's not just me showing up as a cameo. There isn't enough time in the world for all the people who know how to draw in the world to support all the people who might want to use drawing in their classrooms. So I'm very interested in equipping instructors with the tools that they need so that they can get better at this, feel confident doing it, support their students effectively, and articulate why this is meaningful for them to their peers and their supervisors.
Sure, of course.
So there's that whole framing end of things and supporting instructors and faculty so that they can get their heads around what they're trying to do and feel good doing it and feel effective doing it. And then there's the component where we're bringing in core best practices in teaching and learning. And so where we would start, where I would like to start and where we started on this project, is talking about what the instructors are actually trying to accomplish in their classroom. And a lot of listeners might be familiar with this as one of the core parts of backwards design approaches to teaching and learning. So we're identifying what we hope students can do and how they think about it. And then we're working back from there. So in these cases, my co-authors, the instructors who are working on this project, really wanted to build out some specific things. They wanted to improve students' ability to notice things, and they wanted to improve students' appreciation of the natural world. They wanted to enhance students' ability to identify specific native species so that they would feel a little more plugged in to the ecosystem around the university. And they wanted to connect students to the history of natural history as both a study and a practice. So drawing, of course, has potential for helping meet a number of those goals, which is why they first reached out to me years ago to support them in this work. And so we started looking at how we could provide both the core training. Here are these basic drawing techniques. Here's why they can be productive for you. All of that part, the workshop that I deliver. And then we spent a fair amount of time talking about the kinds of assignments that they could give to students and how they could build up those assignments, build up the complexity of them over time to scaffold toward more complicated assignments and hopefully growing confidence and skill in making those observations, synthesizing the information that they were learning in class, and representing at least some of that information through sketches and notes in their notebooks. So there are some examples in our paper of the kinds of assignments and activities that they assigned. And I'm going to focus on one that actually isn't in the paper, just to add another tool to the toolkit for folks who are listening. And that's this idea of a sit spot. And there's a couple of different ways that you can approach a sit spot. And it's not an assignment that is only possible if you're using drawing, but drawing goes along very well with it. And the idea is that students choose a place that they're going to go to regularly, ideally at least once a week, over the course of several weeks, or even the whole semester. And each time they go, you can do one of two things. You can ask them to focus on phenology as an overarching theme, and so they're just supposed to notice things, like maybe they pick a tree or a shrub or a bird or something that's consistent in that environment. to track every week and see what changes and what stays the same and what kinds of questions they start developing. And then the other way to frame a sit spot that, again, can be really well integrated with drawing is to have the instructor provide a theme or some kind of lens to focus on each week. So you might go the first time and just kind of explore. The next time you might look at geology, and then water, and then flora and fauna, and so on, like that, and start getting to intimately know that space and use your drawing and your field journal to record what you're noticing, and really importantly, to record your questions. So through the workshop approach and through the coaching that I do with the instructors and ideally the assignments, we're always emphasizing that most of the time, science is actually a process of asking questions, not a process of actually having right answers, say, to a particular chemistry experiment. So the field journal and the drawing process can ideally be another way that we can help students learn to move beyond memorizing things to start really noticing things and asking questions, and potentially asking questions that don't have easy answers. And even that ideal trajectory of gaining confidence and willingness to ask kind of unanswerable questions is something that you can track as a development over time in students' work. And again, drawing isn't the only way to build that sort of capacity, but it can be a really productive companion or central tool to building that sort of noticing and supporting the students to get invested in what they're seeing and learning about.
Wow, that's phenomenal. That sounds very relaxing, honestly. Just to have this nice little sit spot. I can think of like 3 off the top of my head that would be perfect.
There's no constraint. You don't have to be a student to do that.
Maybe I will start having a sit spot. That sounds very nice. Great. So yeah, we've talked a lot about kind of some of the tools that you were using towards these goals. What did you find?
So we found a couple of things. One important thing to note is that we didn't have a super extensive sample size. So it's not like we can extrapolate that these results would hold for every student and every instructor everywhere. But what we found with the 2 faculty and the group of students that we were working with is that drawing did make a difference in how confident they felt about drawing for the students. It enhanced some of their capacity to appreciate nature. It actually built out for some students an increased likelihood to use drawing to learn in other classrooms and other more informal environments. And those were things that we documented through a combination of asking students to complete a survey at the end of the semester and through just looking at their journals over time and recording any specific feedback that the students may have given the instructors about using field journals. So for example, we didn't quote this in the paper, but there were students who said that the field journaling and the drawing component of this class made this class and that specific part of that class the best hour of her week every week. And obviously, again, there will be students who don't get the same satisfaction or joy or calm experience out of it that student did. But there's been fairly consistently over the last number of years as I've been working with one of these faculty members, there's usually a couple of students a semester who say something like that. So it's also pointing us to what we might look into next, which we can get into more in a little bit. And then with the faculty, we found roughly what we thought we would find, which is that coaching faculty makes a difference, that they probably wouldn't have ever even asked their students to sketch if they didn't have this kind of support and scaffolding for themselves. And so then students would have missed out on that opportunity, that whole important component of, historical approaches to natural history would have been missing from their awareness of how natural history gets studied and practiced. And we also found, as I was mentioning earlier, that the longer that the faculty had this kind of support, the more confident they were in kind of forging ahead and designing their own assignments, starting to establish their own rubrics. And in the case of my co-author, who we'd worked with longer together, he's actually started assigning drawing and field journals in other courses, and he's actually not making it mandatory, but making it an option for students on exams in other courses to use a sketch as part of how they respond to test questions. So at least in our case here, we were seeing that it made a real difference to support the instructor in terms of like a kind of gateway experience to even get them willing to try it. And then the longer the instructor was supported, the more confident and autonomous that they were becoming.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's so great. Yeah, man, how fun to be able to use drawing as part of your answer on a test. I love that. You mentioned future research, which is actually my next question. So, what are the next steps, whether that is just doing more research on art integration with science in general, expanding these kinds of programs? Like, where are we going with this?
So, a possible couple of directions. Broadly, this is work that I do. So, I'm interested in how art and humanities based practices, when they're integrated into science teaching, learning, research, and outreach, how those practices can impact and ideally enhance the work that people do. And so the question is, if the operating hypothesis is that these things help, then the question is, how do we know if they have helped or not? And so I'm really interested in more work that asks those kinds of questions and have some projects going on along those lines. And then specifically to this project, the next level that we're working on is reaching out to more instructors, both in the K-12 system and in the higher ed, university, and community college systems, to ask them if they want to do this. And so we're building in an instructor pre and post survey. We're building in a pre-survey for the students, which we didn't actually use in the particular project we reported in this paper. So getting a better idea of where people start and then where they end up at the end of the semester is a simple and fairly obvious next step, but I think that it could be important, particularly if we start to get large enough sample sizes that we can draw some real conclusions. And in that realm, one thing that I'm really interested in is what makes faculty interested in doing this, but reluctant to or avoidant of it. So why would you want drawing in your classroom, but be like, yeah, but as cool as that sounds, it's not something I'm going to do on my own? Because I think understanding better what the barriers are can help us understand better how to work people past them to where they have an opportunity to actually start training in this area, building their own drawing skills, building their own confidence in facilitating that in the classroom. And yeah, I think it's a little bit like you can't really teach a person to fish, even though that self-sufficiency slogan is out there. You can't teach them to fish if they are completely freaked out by water.
Sure, of course.
Right. So I've run into this as I've done this work, that there's this foundational issue, which is people's anxiety and adverse conditioning around drawing. And so I'm getting increasingly interested in how we understand where that concern comes from so that we can start building experiences and environments that help people overcome that concern. And then we can deliver the foundational drawing training, which people have been training in since at least the Renaissance. And so we have a sort of track record that some of those techniques work. but how do we get people to where they're open enough to try them? And then the addition in the space that we're working on in this paper is, so we've taught somebody how to draw. How does that impact their learning, or how does that impact their teaching? So kind of the two bookends around the actual technical skills of drawing are the areas that I'm interested in digging into next.
Man, I just adore this topic. I feel like I could just talk for like hours and hours, listen for hours and hours just on all of the intricacies there of just how humans work. I love it. But I promise I will not keep you for that long. We've actually just got 3 questions left for you, as splendid as this conversation has been so far. So first question is, if people want to learn more about any of the things we've talked about or related issues, where can they go?
Well, likely they came across this podcast because of the connection to the Natural Sciences Education Journal, but that would be the first place to go. It's an open access paper, so it should be something that's accessible to folks, even if they don't have a connection to a university or a library. And we really carefully wrote it in a way that was accessible and practitioner and educator friendly. So it shouldn't feel overly technical or stodgy as a document. So hopefully it will be useful for educators from the K-12 realm all the way up through higher education. And then if folks are interested in the work that I do, they can visit my website, and that's www.commnatural.com. So COMMNATURAL.com.
Great. We will include a link to that in the show notes, both of those actually, in the show notes for sure. I can back you up on the readability. It's very, very well written. And then next question is, if people then want to start getting involved in these or similar programs or research, what would be the first steps there?
Well, if they want to get involved in the specific research that I'm working on, they're welcome to contact me directly. And my email address is bmerkle, MERKLE, at uwyo.edu. And I'm sure you can share that in the show notes. And we would be talking about a process similar to what's described in this paper. Folks would be signing up to have this process happen with them and their students. So we would be working to introduce faculty to and educators who are outside the university system to the foundational ideas and some of the resources. And then we would be running a 90-minute drawing workshop in their classrooms, and we can do that remotely. We've figured out it works just fine thanks to COVID. And then we would be working on them embedding drawing into assignments and assessments throughout the rest of the semester. And we would be running these pre and post surveys and looking at student work before and after the class. And depending on how stoked people are about it, they can potentially just participate in that process and hand off the survey results and the student work to us, and we can analyze it and report back to them. Or there's even potential for folks to get involved in the rest of the work of the research process. And then if broadly folks are interested in trying this kind of stuff, but not necessarily working directly with the research project that we have going, there are a number of really great next threads to follow that we've cited in the paper. Pretty much everything that we cited in there is something that people can use. And so I would say starting with the literature cited on our paper would be a great next place to go to read up on some of the different angles of all of this. And I will say also, if you think that you just want to get a little bit of training in this yourself, try things out before you maybe commit to doing this in your classroom, one of the best folks for training with is this guy named John Muir Laws. And he's kind of like the West Coast Sibley for birding stuff. And he's an excellent artist and a really accomplished teaching artist. And his website has an incredible amount of recorded how to draw this, how to draw that workshops, as well as basic field journaling workshops and field journaling resources. So he's cited a few times in our paper, but if you were going to save yourself the trouble of running through our works cited, I would start with him.
Great. We will include some links to that in the show notes as well. Maybe get some specific pointers laid out there. Final question. What is one fun fact that people would not know about you if all they had was your research?
So I think it could be that my take on gardening is that it's an extreme sport. That's because I live and garden at 7,200 feet in elevation, and I've been gardening for about as long as I've been teaching drawing and been coaching people on how to garden as well. And I am super stoked about our garden this season. We have had fresh vegetables from April through today, which means that we've just about doubled our frost-free season. Where I live, we have about 115 frost-free days, and we're at 225 and counting. So you would not figure that out probably from my drawing research work, but I think I find the garden a fair amount of inspiration in and of itself, and it's an interesting connection back to a number of the research foci that natural sciences education highlights, actually.
Yeah, that sounds very extreme and also like a great sit spot for you. So yeah, and we've got an urban agriculture journal as well. So maybe there's another area for you to explore. But yeah, wow, how fun. What kind of stuff are you growing in there?
Well, at this point in the season, we have some little PVC cold frames with heavy-duty greenhouse plastic on them, and we're down to a number of different types of greens and parsley. It turns out that you can't kill parsley. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, and there's some spinach that's not even under cover, and it's been snowed on and down to about -18 already here, and it's still cranking. So I think there's a chance this will last as long as we're willing to fuss with it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked. I've actually never used cold frames before, even though I've read about them and encouraged lots of other people to use them. And it's just absolutely revolutionized the way that we've done our garden this year.
Wow. I don't even know what that is, but I will be sure to look it up.
It's just the basic idea that you are not providing any heat source, like it's not decomposing manure that gives off heat, and you're not putting in a lamp or something that would give off heat, or a straight up heater in a greenhouse. You're just making some kind of cover that can slightly insulate the space of your raised bed or your ground garden bed. And then you're basically making a micro greenhouse, and just like the greenhouse gas effect traps and kind of reflects heat back into the earth, the same thing is happening inside those little structures. And so they're called cold frames because they're framed, and there's not an supplemental heat source, but you're just kind of trying to capture and kind of exaggerate the amount of heat that might be generated by sunshine during shoulder seasons.
Wow, that's super neat. Yet another thing I have learned during our conversation. Well, great. I am so happy for you and your garden and your research. It sounds just so interesting. And what a joy to be able to do something you're passionate about all the time. That's great. So yeah, thanks for being on the show. Thank you for your time. And yeah, thanks so much.
It was absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. You'll find links to today's resources in our show notes or on our website. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations for show topics, please contact us at podcast@sciencesocieties.org or on Twitter @FieldLabEarth. If you'd like to hear more content like this, please subscribe, and don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Stitcher, or anywhere else you find your podcasts if you like our show. We're also available on Lyceum, the world's first audio learning community, where you can join our discussion group and comment on each episode. This podcast is a joint production of the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, and Soil Science Society of America. Special thanks to Lobo Loco for the use of their song Spook Castle on the intro and outro of our show. Opinions and conclusions expressed by guests are their own and are not considered as those of the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, Soil Science Society of America, its staff, its members, or its advertisers.